For most of human history, a phone number belonged to a place, a wall, a desk, the end of a wire. This story is about how that wire disappeared, how the air itself became infrastructure, and how a century of physics, politics, and ambition quietly reshaped the way every human on Earth connects. This is not just the history of mobile networks. It is the story of how distance collapsed. For most of the modern age, a phone number belonged to a place. It belonged to a kitchen wall, a receptionist's desk, a hallway where a cord could stretch just far enough for a private sentence. It belonged to the end of a wire. The wire was the promise and also the limitation. You could reach someone across the country, but only if they were where the copper ended. We talk about wireless like it is weightless, like it arrived as a clean idea, a convenience that simply appeared. But mobile networking was never light. It was born heavy, expensive, improvised, and imperfect. It grew through a century of radio physics, national policy, industrial rivalry, and 1,000 small decisions that were invisible to everyone except the people forced to make them under pressure. The story begins with a misunderstanding that would echo for decades. The early dream of mobility was not about pocket freedom. It was about cars. It was about business. It was about command and control, executives and dispatchers, and government fleets. The first mobile telephone systems were closer to a taxi radio than anything we would call a modern phone. They worked, when they worked, because a city was treated like a single room, and the network was treated like a single loudspeaker. In the mid-1940s, the idea of placing a telephone call from a moving vehicle shifted from novelty to service. In St. Louis, Bell Labs and the American telephone monopoly introduced a commercial mobile telephone service. It was a marvel in the way that a first airplane is a marvel. It proved a thing could be done, but it did not yet prove that the thing could scale, or become normal, or fade into the background. The equipment was not something you carried. It sat in the trunk. It weighed so much that the car itself felt like part of the device. A handset was mounted near the dashboard. To make a call, you did not dial a person. You called a system. You waited, sometimes for a long time, for an operator to answer, and the operator patched you into the landline network the way a human switchboard had done for decades. Even the act of speaking carried the language of a walkie-talkie. You could not talk over someone. You pressed to speak, released to listen. The air itself felt like a scarce commodity because it was. In major cities, the number of simultaneous calls the system could support was so small that the service resembled a private club. The signal came from a single high-powered transmitter, usually placed to dominate a metropolitan area. The physics were simple and brutal. A tower could shout, but it could not host a crowd. Once the available channels were occupied, everyone else waited. This was the first era of mobility, what later generations would call zero generation. It was a pre-cellular world. And it is important to understand what that means because it explains why the leap to true cellular felt like a kind of magic. In a pre-cellular system, coverage is centralized and capacity is fixed. The city is one broadcast domain. The network is a handful of lanes, and when those lanes are full, traffic stops. Mobility exists, but only for the few. By the 1960s, improved systems began to automate what had been manual. Automatic dialing arrived. The operator disappeared from the middle of the call. The experience moved closer to what people thought of as a phone. But the bottleneck remained. A central transmitter still served the city. Capacity still collapsed at the first sign of popularity. The engineering could polish the edges, but it could not change the nature of the system. And this is where the story stops being a single national narrative. Because while the American system evolved under one corporate umbrella, other countries explored different paths, sometimes out of necessity, sometimes because their telecommunications culture was more experimental, sometimes because their geography demanded a different approach. Northern Europe developed automatic vehicular systems that pushed the idea of a network beyond a single transmitter. In the Soviet Union, engineers created a service that covered cities for officials, relying on a network of base stations that hinted at what would come. These systems were not cellular in the modern sense, but they were steps away from the assumption that one tower had to do everything. What held the world back was not imagination. The core idea of cellular was proposed early, and it was proposed with an elegance that now feels inevitable. The idea was to divide a city into small zones, cells, each with its own low-power transmitter. If each transmitter spoke quietly to its local area, the same frequencies could be reused elsewhere, like a conversation repeated at a distance where it could not be overheard. Frequency reuse was the concept. It was the foundation of everything that followed. The brilliance of the cellular concept is that it turns a limitation into a tool. In radio, distance is both strength and interference. A powerful transmitter gives coverage, but it also pollutes the air with a signal that blocks others. A low-power transmitter gives less reach, but it creates the possibility of repetition. With a grid of cells, capacity can scale with infrastructure. Add more cells, add more simultaneous calls. Build a denser network. Create a denser society of communication. But cellular was not only a geometric idea, it was also a computing problem. If a user moves, the system must move the call. The call must be handed off from one cell to the next without interruption. That handoff is not a trivial switch. It requires measurement, decision, timing, coordination, and a kind of invisible choreography between towers. In the 1940s, the computers required to do that at scale did not exist. The radio theory was ahead of the control systems. The concept had to wait for computation to catch up. For decades, mobility stayed trapped in the pre-cellular pattern. Expensive hardware, scarce channels, localized service, the sense that the air was a luxury. Then, in the early 1970s, an engineer carried a different future onto a Manhattan street corner. He held a prototype that looked like a brick of electronics with a handset attached. It was not sleek. It did not pretend to be consumer-friendly. It was an argument. The famous story is not just that the call worked. It is who he called. He called a rival, an engineer whose own institution had dominated telecommunications research. The message was not subtle. This was a handheld cellular phone. Not a car phone. Not a trunk system. A handheld device that could be carried through a city and remain connected through a cellular network. It was a technical demonstration and a corporate provocation at once. That moment is often remembered as a birth. But births are messy, and this one did not immediately produce a world of pocket devices. The next chapter was not triumph, but delay. Regulation, spectrum allocation, industrial politics, and the inertia of existing systems slowed the transition. Meanwhile, elsewhere, a country that had built a reputation for moving first, moved first again. Japan launched the first commercial analog cellular network in Tokyo at the end of the 1970s and expanded it nationally soon after. Northern Europe launched a system that quietly contained one of the most culturally important features in the history of mobility: international roaming. The idea that you could cross a border and keep your number, keep your identity, keep your connection. In a continent defined by borders and travel, that mattered. In the United States, the first widespread analog cellular service arrived in the early 1980s. The standard that defined it treated a call as an occupied slice of radio spectrum. One user, one channel for the duration of the conversation. It was simple, and it worked. And it carried a flaw that would define the generation. Analog is a broadcast. It can be heard. There was no encryption, no meaningful protection. A cheap scanner could pick up private conversations. Fraud emerged not as a rare hack, but as a business. Phone cloning became a kind of dark mirror to the market itself, exploiting the fact that identity traveled through the air in plain form. This analog era also produced a symbol, and symbols matter because they are how a technology becomes cultural. The first truly iconic handheld cellular phone was expensive enough to be a statement. It was heavy enough to be noticed. Its battery barely lasted a short call and then demanded hours of charging. Yet in the 1980s, it became a status object, an emblem of ambition, an accessory to power. It appeared in films not because filmmakers wanted to explain a network, but because they wanted to show a person who had the kind of life where a call could arrive anywhere. The phone was not just a device. It was a narrative shorthand for control. Behind the symbol was a quieter revolution in silicon. The analog cellular phone was made possible by a transition in electronics that shrank radio circuitry from the scale of laboratory equipment to the scale of consumer hardware. Large-scale integration did not just reduce size, it changed what was economically possible. It allowed complexity to move inside the device, and that created the first feedback loop of the modern era. As phones became smaller and more desirable, more people wanted them. As more people wanted them, networks faced congestion. As networks faced congestion, the industry needed a better way to use spectrum. The story of mobile networks is always this loop. Desire creates load. Load creates innovation. Innovation creates new desire. The second generation arrived with a philosophical shift that now feels obvious. If analog made voice a waveform, digital made voice a data stream. The question was not just quality, it was capacity, security, and global compatibility. Digital compression allowed more calls within the same spectrum. Digital signaling allowed new features. Most importantly, digital identity could be protected, at least in theory, by cryptography. But the digital revolution did not happen as a single unified event. It emerged as a political solution to a political problem. In Europe, the analog landscape had become a patchwork. Each nation had its own system. Travel across borders meant disconnection. The continent needed a standard not only for convenience, but for economic integration. The creation of a unified digital system was not just engineering. It was a declaration that mobility should work across nations, not within them. When the first commercial digital network launched in Northern Europe in the early 1990s, it was more than a technology milestone. It was a proof that standardization could become infrastructure. The first calls made on that system were treated as public events involving national leaders because they were understood as modernity in action. A generation was being inaugurated. One of the most enduring inventions of this era was small enough to be ignored: the SIM card. Before it, the phone itself was the identity. Change the phone, change the account. With the SIM, identity became portable. Your number, your authentication, and later much of your personal data moved onto a chip that could be carried and swapped. This decoupling of user from device is one of the most important cultural shifts in mobile history. It made phones into consumer goods in a deeper sense. You could upgrade without changing who you were in the network. You could borrow a phone. You could carry your identity in a pocket like a key. Then came a feature that was almost an accident. A tiny side channel that no one expected to become a language. Short message service was designed as a technical utility, a way for networks to send small notifications, not a way for people to express themselves. The character limit was set not as a poetic constraint, but as an engineering choice tied to signaling capacity. And yet constraints create form. When the first text message was sent in the early 1990s, it was mundane and seasonal, a simple greeting. It did not announce a new age, but it opened a door. Texting took years to become popular because early phones were not built for it, and carriers did not yet know how to monetize it. Then predictive text systems made it fast, and young users made it social. The phone began to host a second layer of communication, quieter than voice, more frequent, more ambient. People started talking without speaking. They began to build relationships in fragments. They invented abbreviations and styles and social norms. A network feature became a cultural dialect. While Europe built a global digital standard, the United States and parts of Asia followed a different path, one shaped by industrial strategy and intellectual property. A competing digital approach promised higher capacity and a different philosophy of spectrum usage. Instead of dividing a frequency into time slots and letting users take turns, it allowed users to share the same band simultaneously, separated by codes. In practice, this meant more efficient use of spectrum, but it also meant a deeper dependence on patents held by specific companies. The standards war that followed was not simply a debate about engineering elegance. It was a fight over who would collect royalties from the few. This is where mobile history becomes a story about power hiding in technicality. Standards are not neutral. They decide who profits, who manufactures, who licenses, who controls. A dominant standard creates economies of scale, a massive ecosystem of compatible devices and infrastructure. But it also creates gatekeepers, owners of essential patents, owners of manufacturing pipelines, owners of political relationships with regulators. In the 1990s, one company understood something profound about this new digital era, that a phone was becoming a computer in disguise. A Finnish conglomerate, once known for industries far from electronics, made a brutal strategic choice to abandon its other identities and focus on mobile devices built for the European standard. This was not only a business pivot, it was a cultural one. It meant designing for ordinary people, not only for executives. It meant treating usability like a weapon. The phones that followed carried a philosophy of simplicity. Menus were understandable, buttons were consistent. Branding moved into the soundscape through recognizable ringtones. Customizable covers turned a device into a personal object. A small built-in game became a ritual, a way to fill dead moments. These were not technical breakthroughs in radio. They were breakthroughs in making the network intimate. This shift mattered because the network itself was changing the economics of connection. In many parts of the world, landline infrastructure was sparse or non-existent. Building copper networks required enormous investment and time. A cellular tower could cover a wide rural area and deliver communication without trenches, without miles of cable. Digital mobile allowed entire regions to leap over the landline era. Suddenly, communities that had never had reliable telephone service could have it, not because the network was cheaper in absolute terms, but because it was cheaper relative to the alternative. This leapfrogging had consequences beyond conversation. It reshaped banking and commerce. In places where traditional financial infrastructure was limited, the ability to send secure small amounts of information through text messages enabled new forms of value transfer. Mobile money systems emerged, allowing users to store and transfer funds through their phones. Minutes and messages became proxies for currency. The phone became not just a communication tool, but an economic identity. And then, as always, desire increased the load. People want more than voice and text. They wanted the web. The third generation was framed as a promise. Mobile internet that felt like the real internet. It arrived at the turn of the millennium with technical ambition and financial risk intertwined. Standards bodies defined requirements for data speed and global interoperability. Countries and carriers invested in spectrum and infrastructure. In Japan, the first commercial third-generation service launched early, continuing that nation's pattern of moving first. Elsewhere, particularly in Europe, the transition collided with an event that now reads like a cautionary tale about hype and state policy. Governments chose to auction third-generation spectrum rights, believing they could raise revenue and let market competition decide winners. The auctions became a frenzy. Operators paid sums so large that they began their third-generation era already wounded. The money went not into towers or research or consumer service, but into the right to exist in the new spectrum. Carriers were saddled with debt. Rollout slowed. The future promised in press releases was delayed by accounting. This period is sometimes described in charts and numbers, but its real story is psychological. It was an era where the air itself was treated like gold, and the right to transmit became an asset class. It taught the industry that technology does not arrive on the timeline of possibility. It arrives on the timeline of capital. Technically, third generation required a new approach to make good on its promise. Wider bands of spectrum were used to carry more data. The network had to handle variable conditions, adapting speed and reliability based on movement and signal quality. It had to manage the complexity of multipath interference in dense cities, where signals reflect off buildings and arrive as echoes. Rather than treating echoes as noise, third-generation systems learned to harvest them, combining multiple delayed copies of a signal into a stronger whole. This is one of those inventions that rarely becomes cultural, yet quietly changes what is possible. The city itself, with all its reflective surfaces, became part of the network. Yet for years, third generation still felt like a technology in search of a purpose. Early mobile web experiences were constrained by portals controlled by carriers. simplified sites, slow loading, and billing models that punished exploration. In the West, many users associated mobile internet with frustration, and the phrase people joked about was not speed, but waiting and paying. In Japan, a different approach succeeded. Content designed for mobile, billing designed for simplicity, and a network culture that treated the phone as a legitimate interface for daily life. It was there that early emoji culture became mainstream, not as decoration, but as emotional punctuation suited to small screens. During the same era, another company was quietly building a different kind of mobile future, one aimed at power rather than pleasure. A Canadian firm created devices that turned email into an always-on presence. The key was not just the network, but the system that pushed messages instantly. Executives became reachable at all times. The boundary between office and home dissolved. The device did not try to be a lifestyle object. It tried to be indispensable. Its physical keyboard shaped behavior. It made thumb typing a professional skill. It also created a form of addiction that was praised rather than feared because it looked like productivity. All of this set the stage for the pivot that defined modern mobile life. It came not from a new network generation, but from a new idea about who should control the phone. Decades, carriers treated phones like controlled terminals. They decided the features, the software, the branding, the user experience. The network was the product. The phone was the accessory. Then a hardware and software company approached the carrier world with a proposal that sounded, at the time, almost arrogant. The device maker demanded creative control, no carrier logos, no carrier-controlled portal, no unwanted applications. The carrier would become a pipe. The phone would become the experience. One major carrier agreed, partly out of desperation, partly out of vision. Launched was not technically perfect. It did not even support third-generation speeds at first. It relied on the stepping stone data network of the late second-generation era. But the software was the breakthrough. It offered a real browser, not a compromised mobile imitation. It treated the web as the web. It made the phone feel like a computer you could hold. When the next version arrived with third-generation capability, it unlocked what third generation all along, but could not deliver without a device that made the web desirable. More importantly, the introduction of an application marketplace turned the phone into a platform. Developers built tools, games, social networks, utilities, and entire businesses around a device that could be updated and extended. The phone became an ecosystem. This shift frightened other technology giants, particularly those whose business depended on controlling the flow of information. Company built on search and advertising recognized the danger of a single manufacturer defining the mobile web. The response was strategic and sweeping. An open-source mobile operating system offered free to manufacturers. This created a flood of devices at every price level. It ensured that no single company would own mobile access. It also ensured that the next era of mobile would be shaped by a competition between two philosophies: a tightly controlled ecosystem and a fragmented, rapidly evolving. Underneath this software war, networks Smartphones consumed vastly more data than feature phones. A network designed primarily for voice with data bolted on began to buckle under the weight of images, maps, and video. The buffering icon became a cultural annoyance, a symbol of a world that had outgrown its infrastructure. This pressure accelerated the transition to fourth generation, and fourth generation was not just faster. It was a redesign of the cellular network as an internet system. To understand the magnitude of the change, you have to understand what a call was. For most of mobile history, To understand the magnitude of the change, you have to understand what a call was. For most of mobile history, voice was treated as a dedicated connection. The network reserved capacity as if building a private wire for the duration of a call. This model wastes resources when no one is speaking, and human conversation is full of silence. Fourth generation abandoned the idea of the circuit. It treated everything as packets. Voice became a specialized stream of data, prioritized and managed like any other stream. This required a new core architecture and new radio techniques. Fourth generation used a method that split data across many small sub-channels, sending pieces simultaneously and recombining them at the receiver. The trick was to keep those sub-channels mathematically aligned so they could overlap without interfering. The result was a more efficient use of spectrum, better performance in difficult radio environments, and a network that could scale data rates far beyond what third generation could sustain. This era also changed the physical design of phones in a way most users never consciously noticed. Multiple antennas became necessary. Radio front-end complexity exploded because phones had to support many frequency bands to work across carriers and regions. The idea of a truly global phone demanded that a device be fluent in a chaotic spectrum landscape. Inside the device, filters, amplifiers, and tuners multiplied. Silicon processes shrank to keep power under control, because faster data and more computation meant more heat. The phone became a balancing act between performance and thermodynamics. Fourth generation also created the conditions for a new kind of economy, one built on real-time mobile interaction. Ride-hailing required constant location updates and quick matching between supply and demand. Social media shifted from text to images to video because the network could finally carry it smoothly. Music consumption moved from ownership to streaming. The portable media player died not because people stopped loving music, but because the network became a better library than a pocket hard drive. And as fourth generation spread across the world, another shift occurred, one that would later become central to geopolitics. Telecommunications infrastructure manufacturing moved decisively toward a new powerhouse. Companies in China invested heavily, producing equipment at prices and speed that challenged long-established European rivals. Networks across many regions adopted this equipment because it worked and because it was affordable. The network became not only a local utility, but part of global supply chains and international influence. By the mid-2010s, the mobile network achieved a strange kind of success. It became boring. It worked well enough that users stopped thinking about it. They thought about apps and content instead. They assumed the network would be there the way they assumed electricity would be there. That assumption is the true mark of infrastructure. You do not celebrate it. You only notice it when it fails. But the boredom concealed a looming problem. Fourth generation was built for billions of phones. The next era would have to serve billions of phones, plus tens of billions of machines. Sensors, meters, vehicles, industrial robots, and city infrastructure demanded connectivity. Some demanded low latency. Some demanded extreme reliability. Some demanded a capacity to connect massive numbers of low-power devices. One network profile could not serve all of them efficiently. Fifth generation was built around this truth. It was not designed only to be faster. It was designed to be more flexible, more programmable, more targeted. The most important shift was conceptual. The network could behave like multiple networks at once. A single physical infrastructure could be divided into virtual slices, each configured for a specific class of service. One slice could prioritize low latency for industrial control. Another could prioritize bandwidth for consumer video. Another could prioritize density for sensors. This was not only engineering, it was a new business model. It allowed carriers and enterprises to buy not just access, but tailored network behavior. To deliver the most dramatic speed improvements, fifth generation also reached into higher frequencies of spectrum. These millimeter wave bands offered enormous bandwidth, but they came with fragile physics. They did not travel far. They did not penetrate walls well. They could be blocked by foliage, by bodies, by the texture of a city. This forced a new approach to infrastructure. Dense deployment of small cells, transmitters placed on street furniture and building sides, a network that feels less like towering broadcasts and more like a mesh woven to the urban environment. To make this mesh practical, fifth generation leaned heavily on advanced antenna arrays and beam forming. Instead of broadcasting energy in all directions, towers could shape signals into focused beams aimed at specific devices, tracking them as they moved. This reduced interference and improved efficiency, but it also demanded enormous computation, both in the network equipment and in the device. Silicon had to evolve again, pushing toward advanced manufacturing nodes and new materials for power handling in base stations. The frontier of mobile networking became a frontier of semiconductor capability. Fifth generation also turned the mobile network into a geopolitical object in a way earlier generations never fully did. When connectivity becomes intertwined with industrial control, transportation, critical infrastructure, and national security, the question of who builds the network stops being a commercial preference and becomes a strategic concern. Allegations, bans, policy pressure, and alliances shape deployment decisions across regions. European infrastructure companies regained relevance as trusted suppliers in some markets. The network supply chain became a map of global trust and distribution. At the same time, fifth generation began integrating with another layer of the sky. Satellites moved from being separate communication systems into being part of the cellular story. Low Earth orbit constellations promised coverage where towers could not reach. The idea of seamless global connectivity, once limited by geography, began to shift again. It was no longer only about building upward from the ground. It was also about building downward from orbit. And as fifth generation matured, a new cycle began quietly, as it always does. Engineers started sketching the next generation. Sixth generation became a label for a set of ambitions. Higher frequency operation into the terahertz range, deeper integration of sensing and communication, and networks that are not merely managed by software, but optimized by artificial intelligence at their core. But before looking forward, the story demands a reckoning with a truth that the language of wireless encourages us to forget. The network is not made of air. It is made of matter. It is made of labor. It has a footprint. Every smartphone begins as a series of extracted materials. Batteries rely on minerals that come from places where mining can be dangerous, exploitative, and politically complex. Supply chains stretch from the earth to refineries to factories to shipping lanes to retail shelves. Most of a device's lifetime environmental impact occurs before it ever reaches the user, and the energy and chemicals required to manufacture silicon, assemble components, and move them across the planet. Then comes the churn. Each network generation encourages a cycle of upgrade, and carriers at times accelerate it by shutting down older networks, rendering devices obsolete even if they still function as objects. Discarded electronics accumulate into an e-waste stream that grows faster than recycling systems can manage. Informal recycling exposes workers to toxic substances. Valuable metals are lost. The language of progress hides a landscape of waste. Networks themselves consume energy, and here the story becomes paradoxical. Newer generations often transmit data more efficiently per unit of energy. Yet efficiency does not automatically reduce total consumption. When data becomes cheaper and faster, people and machines use more of it. Video quality rises. Background processes multiply. Always-on services expand. This is the rebound effect, a pattern where technological efficiency increases demand enough to offset gains. The network becomes more efficient, and the world becomes more dependent. The social footprint is harder to measure, but impossible to ignore. As mobile communication evolved from voice to text to internet to algorithmic feeds, it reshaped attention. It created a new economy built on time and focus. Notifications became a behavioral lever. Infinite scroll became a design philosophy. People began to live in a constant low-level negotiation between the physical world and a digital one, always available in the palm. Studies and debates followed, asking what happens to mental health, sleep, and social cohesion when connectivity becomes ambient. And yet, alongside these costs, mobile networks have delivered undeniable benefits. They have connected rural communities to markets and services. They have enabled emergency response. They have provided access to education and information. They have allowed entrepreneurship to emerge in places where traditional infrastructure was missing. The network is not a villain or a hero. It is a force multiplier. It amplifies the intentions and incentives of those who build on it. To understand why this is so, you have to look at the invisible layer that rarely enters public conversation: intellectual property. Mobile networking is one of the most patented technological domains on Earth. Standardization requires companies to contribute technologies that become essential to the standard. Those essential patents must be licensed, ideally under terms meant to be fair and non-discriminatory. But fairness is contested, and contested fairness becomes litigation. The smartphone era made this conflict visible to consumers through lawsuits that turned design details into legal battlegrounds. The shape of a device, the behavior of scrolling, the arrangement of icons all became claims worth enormous sums. Meanwhile, deeper in the stack, companies that own core radio techniques use standard essential patents to demand royalties. Manufacturers argued over what was reasonable. Courts in multiple countries became arenas where the price of invisible technology was decided. Patent portfolios became strategic assets that could be bought and sold, used defensively, or deployed offensively. The purchase of large patent collections was not always about invention. It was about leverage. It was about preventing rivals from arming themselves. It was about ensuring freedom to operate in a market where one missing license could threaten an entire product line. In the fifth-generation era, the geography of patent power shifted. Companies in China increased their share of declared essential patents, changing the flow of royalties and adding another layer to geopolitical tension. When a nation's companies own essential pieces of a global standard, that ownership becomes a form of soft power. It becomes revenue, influence, and bargaining position. The network is not only a technical system, it is also a legal economy. Then there is the shadow war, the history of security, a story that runs alongside every generation, like a second narrative whispered under the main one. In the analog era, security was almost non-existent. Anyone with a scanner could listen. Fraud thrived because identity traveled through the air in plain form. Digital networks introduced encryption and stronger identity management, but they also introduced new vulnerabilities in the signaling systems that tie carriers together. One of the most unsettling truths of mobile security is that the weakest links often live in legacy. Protocols designed in an era of trust persisted into an era of adversarial access. Signaling systems built when only national operators could participate became exploitable when access could be bought or compromised. Attackers learned to intercept authentication codes, track users, redirect communications, and exploit the fact that the global network still assumes many messages are legitimate simply because they arrive through the right channel. Later generations hardened many of these weaknesses through mutual authentication and improved privacy mechanisms, reducing the ease of fake base station attacks and limiting how easily a device can be tracked through unprotected identifiers. But security is never finished. It is a contest. Each improvement shifts the attack surface. Looking forward, the next threat is not only human ingenuity, but computational scale. As quantum computing advances, certain forms of encryption that protect digital life may become vulnerable. This has pushed research into post-quantum cryptography, new mathematical problems believed to resist quantum attack. It has also encouraged a different kind of thinking, using the physical randomness of radio environments as a security resource, generating keys from unique signal characteristics that are difficult to replicate. In the future, the network may not only transmit data, it may also continuously prove in real time that the connection is authentic. This is where the sixth-generation vision becomes both exhilarating and unsettling. Sixth generation is often described in extreme speeds, terabit ambitions, and the terahertz spectrum. But speed is not the only point. The deeper theme is integration. Communication merges with sensing. The network begins to map the physical environment as a natural part of its operation, using reflections to understand space. This can improve reliability and efficiency, but it also raises questions about surveillance and privacy. When the network sees, who controls what it sees? Artificial intelligence is expected to move from being a tool used to optimize networks into being a native layer of network behavior. Networks will become too complex for static human design management at every moment. AI systems will predict congestion, allocate resources, heal faults, and adjust parameters in real time. The network becomes less like a machine and more like an organism. It adapts, it anticipates, it changes itself. At the same time, connectivity may become less associated with a single device. The smartphone may not disappear quickly, but it may become less central. Wearables, glasses, and ambient sensors will share the role of interface. Connectivity will be distributed across objects. Identity may become a cloud construct tied to multiple endpoints. The idea of carrying a phone could start to feel like carrying a single key for a house that now recognizes you by presence. This future arrives with a moral challenge that cannot be solved by spectrum alone. Even now, billions of people remain without reliable internet access. The digital divide is not just a matter of towers, it is a matter of affordability, literacy, and political stability. It is a matter of whether connectivity empowers or extracts. Satellite integration promises coverage, but coverage does not automatically produce equality. The value of the network depends on whether people can use it safely and effectively, whether their identities are protected, whether their access is not conditional on exploitation. The story of mobile networks, then, is not a simple line from heavy bricks to invisible ubiquity. It is a story of shifting control. In the early era, control belonged to the operator and the state. The network was rare, and access was power. In the smartphone era, control shifted toward device makers and software platforms. The network became a pipe, and the interface became the product. In the fifth-generation era, control begins to fragment again because the network becomes programmable and slices can be sold to enterprises, and infrastructure's supply chains become strategic, and satellite layers become part of the standard. Across all of this, one theme remains constant. Every generation promises to erase friction. Every generation succeeds enough to create a new dependency. Every generation makes the previous one feel limited, not because the previous one was not miraculous, but because human behavior expands into available capacity, like water into an open container. The network does not only carry culture, it shapes it by making certain behaviors effortless and therefore normal. In the 1980s, carrying a phone made you a spectacle. In the 1990s, texting made private communication portable and discreet. In the 2000s, mobile internet made information retrieval immediate and changed what it meant to be lost, to be bored, to be unreachable. In the 2010s, broadband mobility enabled the gig economy and turned video into a default language. In the 2020s, the network begins to serve machines and the city itself becomes part of the signal path. And when you step back, the most radical transformation is not speed. It is the relocation of identity. Once your number was a place, then it became a person. Now it is becoming a profile, a set of credentials, a persistent digital presence that moves across devices, services, and networks. With that shift comes both freedom and vulnerability. A lost phone is no longer just a lost object. It can be a lost self. A compromised message can become a compromised life. The network has become intimate enough that its failures are personal. There is a temptation to end this story on a triumphant note, to treat the cutting of the tether as pure liberation. The tether was real, and mobility has been liberating in countless ways. But the tether also provided boundaries. It provided silence. It provided a reason you could not be reached. The mobile network did not only cut the wire, it also rewrote the social contract around availability. It taught employers to expect response. It taught friends to expect instant replies. It taught institutions to treat a phone number as an identity. So the future question is not only what networks can do, it is what we choose to do with networks that can do almost anything. By the time the sixth generation arrives in its mature form, the network may feel less like a service you connect to and more like an environment you inhabit. A world where the air carries not just voices, but sensing, transactions, machine coordination, and immersive presence. A world where distance collapses even further, where the network becomes a kind of planetary nervous. The engineering challenge will continue because physics never stops presenting trade-offs. Higher frequencies bring higher capacity and also higher fragility. Denser infrastructure brings better service and also greater energy and material demands. More intelligence brings more optimization and also more complexity, more potential failure modes, more ethical questions. The deepest challenge is human. The network can be a tool for equality or a tool for surveillance. It can distribute opportunity or concentrate power. It can enrich culture or algorithmic sameness. It can connect people or isolate them behind optimized feeds. The story of mobile networks is often told as a march of progress, one generation after another, one acronym replacing the last. But underneath the acronyms is a humanity, learning to treat the air as infrastructure, turning emptiness into a medium, turning radio into identity, turning physics into culture. From the first trunk-mounted systems with manual operators to the first analog cellular grids that made the brick a status object, to the digital revolution that gave us portable identity and texting, to the costly third-generation gamble smartphones, to the all-IP fourth-generation network that made mobile broadband ordinary, to the fifth-generation system that slices itself into tailored realities, and into the sixth-generation horizon where communication and sensing merge. The direction is the network is disappearing into the world, and in doing so, it is changing what the world is. We once asked whether we could make a call from a car. Now we ask whether a city can think. And somewhere inside that shift is the quiet truth that has all. Every time we made communication easier, we made society more dependent on communication. Every time we made the network faster, we made the world expect speed. Every time we removed friction, we removed a pause where choice could live. The tether has been cut. The invisible thread now wraps the planet. The question that remains is not whether it will tighten. It will. The question is whether we can learn to live within it without letting it become a leash. From 80-pound car phones to invisible networks that sense, think, and adapt, we have turned the air around us into the backbone of modern civilization. And the next chapter is already being written. If you want to understand where connectivity is going and what it will demand from us in return, stay with this series. Like, subscribe, and share this documentary because the future of the network is not just about technology.